Hi everybody, I'm John Ivison. I'm your host for our weekly trek around the political follies. I'm joined by Andrew Balfour, who is the managing partner of Rubicon Strategies, and as usual by Marcella Munro, who is the owner-operator of WPM Public Affairs. We are going to talk about sexual misconduct in the military, the border issue, which seems a perennial point of dispute between provinces and feds, sick leave, paid sick leave, and then the prospect that we may end up drinking in parks by Canada Day, let's hope. Anyway, a lot to cover. So let's start with the news breaking just as we recorded this, that Louise Arbour, the former Supreme Court Justice, has been tapped to lead an independent review of sexual misconduct in the military. Now, I'm greying of hair and fading of memory, but I seem to recall a similar review by another former Supreme Court Justice in 2015, Madame Marie Deschamps, who issued a report saying that there was a very sexualised culture in the military and that there should be independent oversight, a suggestion that was rejected by many people in the military as suggesting we will probably lose the next war if this happened. So what can Louise Arbour possibly recommend that Marie Deschamps did not? Marcella?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty enraged by this. This is preposterous nonsense. I mean, the reality is that the CAF, from what we know, the leadership of the CAF, basically has been resisting implementing most of the Deschamps report. So I don't know how you fix that. I don't know what it is they think that Madame Arbour is going to be able to go in and find out that Deschamps could not. Will she come up with a harsher report, I guess? But in the meantime, what we do know is that there's hundreds of people, mainly women, who have come forward with varying degrees of complaints around sexual assault and sexual misconduct in the military, who don't feel like their issues are being taken seriously enough. They don't trust the system by which these issues are adjudicated. They have been loud and clear in wanting a different process. And yet this government can't seem to figure out how to do that. And so what we have now is yet another inquiry, another commission, a massive press conference. I mean, were there 3 or 4 government ministers and or secretaries on this Zoom platform this morning? I've always had a lot of time for Minister Sajan, but right now I'm perplexed as to why he's still the minister.
Andrew, is this merely to deflect from the growing scandal around the former Chief of the Defence Staff, Jonathan Vance, who denies all allegations of wrongdoing, but there are suggestions that far from stamping out this highly sexualised culture, he more or less fostered it through his own behaviour. It now looks like this committee investigations are getting close to the Prime Minister's office, and suddenly we have an independent inquiry. Are these facts totally unrelated?
Well, no, they're certainly not unrelated, but I think what we see now is that whether there have been 20 reports or 1 report done before, they haven't done anything. So this is a government who sees an issue that is getting quite close to home and sees that they need to do something. I don't know, to Marcella's point, I don't know if this will accomplish anything or if this will affect change in the forces, but they are now doing something about it. And clearly, to what you just said, there are systemic issues that need to be fixed. So hopefully, whatever this report from Justice Arbour says is actually followed through on, because it doesn't seem like anything done to date has fixed these issues going on in the forces.
Okay, let's move on to the pandemic. It obviously dominates politics as it dominates every other domain of life. Let's chat about what we hope is the darkness before the dawn, and look at border issues and then paid sick leave. I'm increasingly of the mind that governments are not there to do things, but they're there to explain why things can't be done. And looking at the border issue, Ottawa's gone to great lengths to downplay the idea that COVID cases are linked to travel. Bill Blair was on Twitter the other day saying that less than 2% of cases over the course of the pandemic are travel related. But if you take a closer look, those official statistics undercount travel-related cases. And I looked at one particular really egregious case where it was the Roberta Place long-term care home in Barrie. An individual who had returned from the UK was quarantining, infected a worker there. The worker subsequently and tragically infected 220 people in the long-term care home, and 71 people died. Yet the local health authority did not attribute any of those cases to travel, which seems to me to be hugely misrepresentative of what is going on. And of course that works in the government's favour, because then it has no case to answer for. It does not have to accept any blame for its border policy. What do you think, Andrew? Is it deliberately underestimating the impact of travel-related cases?
Well, I don't think that anything in COVID is deliberate. I think that it's all unprecedented. I think that we can even look to the different ways in which the different provinces track variant cases and the reporting on that. I mean, there's no single system. There's no reporting around the number of variants and how long it takes. And, a lot at this point in time, it's hard to believe most of the numbers that the provincial health authorities put out around anything, because we just don't know. But I mean, in that case that you were talking about, as you wrote about this week, I mean, the most tragic part about that is that they were scheduled to get vaccinated and then those were deferred to another place. That kind of, to me, is the worst part of that whole story.
There was another story out today, Marcella, about even after we brought in quarantine hotels, there are still thousands of people coming through the system with bringing in variants of concern. Is there more needs to be done, do you think, on the border, or even, frankly, internal flights, moving variants like the P1 variant that's in BC into provinces like Ontario, where it really doesn't exist to any great extent?
I think it's, we've been at this for a year, right? So we know more about this virus than we did at this point last year. And what we know from watching successful jurisdictions is that shutting down airports, shutting down intercountry travel, and we've forgotten to talk about this much recently because of the vaccination program. We've done a crappy job at contact tracing and a very bad job at rapid testing, which are two things last summer that we were kind of told were necessary if we were going to get this under control. You only need to look to the Atlantic provinces and to what Nova Scotia is doing to see that governments who kind of have a no-nonsense approach just shut the borders. And so, yeah, I do think the travel thing is very frustrating. I think, there's massive holes in it. I don't actually blame people for skirting the system, by the way. I think, if the government doesn't have a cohesive plan, why would anyone, pay $2,000 to sit in a crappy hotel waiting for a test that isn't rapid?
Right. You mentioned the fact that we're a year in and we should have learned lessons. I mean, I think everybody recognises, and probably recognised a year ago, that paid sick leave was one way to stop exposures. When there's an outbreak in a workplace, keep workers home. And yet, it was just this week that Ontario has come up with a plan to handle this. I mean, it had relied to this point on the federal government's sickness benefit, which is $450 a week that you may or may not get at some point in the future. And, by the take-up rate, it's pretty clear that many workers wake up in the morning with a tickly throat and decide, well, I'll just go to work because I don't know whether I can afford to wait or to see the cut in wages that the sickness benefit requires. I think if anything makes the blood pressure rise, it's watching the federal government and provincial governments squabble about these issues and who's to blame for them. Andrew?
Well, I mean, the largest outbreak that has taken place in Canada was at that Cargill plant in Alberta, and they only announced this week that they're going to do a vaccination program there. That was almost a year ago. That's pretty insane. I don't, not a policy issue, but a communications issue. If I was either the federal government or the government of Ontario and I'm in this fight on paid sick leave, I haven't heard anyone communicate around the number of Ontarians or the number of British Columbians or affected by this. We don't know. You see different numbers in different places, but I think that you would get a much more uptake if you were speaking to those people. If you're the Ford government, I would imagine that a lot of these people who are not getting paid sick leave probably aren't their voter. Not that that should matter in a pandemic, but that is a consideration. Whereas in other places it would matter more. I don't think either, though, that a lot of people have been trying very hard to make this work because it's a lot easier to just point fingers at each other than to come up with proper public policy.
I mean, Marcella, it did seem that the Trudeau government wanted the Ford government to reverse itself on after it cut paid sick leave when it came in as part of its labour reforms. It wanted permanent mandated sick leave in provincially regulated industries. I mean, that was a political point. The Ford government obviously resisted that, and we had an impasse for a period of time. Eventually, the Ford government has decided to go it alone. It'll pay double what the feds were paying. It'll pay 3 days paid sick leave, reimbursing employers. But we can see the finishing line from where we are now. And yet there are jurisdictions like Yukon, for example, that in March 2020 introduced a simple system whereby a worker waking up with a scratchy throat stays in bed and the province reimburses the employer. It doesn't seem like some of this stuff is that hard, and yet we get it wrong continually.
Yeah, I mean, it's super frustrating, especially when there are, unions, for example, who have been advocating that there is this gap in the paid sick leave system for years. And now the pandemic is just showing us what the tragic consequences are of that, particularly for people who are vulnerable in their workplaces. I was also very frustrated this week by all of this because in British Columbia, there's a new Democrat government that seems to me should have been on this day one, figuring out how to manage this. And I'm
amazed that they're in the same boat as the four Conservatives.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. The one thing I would say, though, because I got so infuriated about this week, I actually spent the time and went back and read that agreement that the Fed signed with the provinces last September for $19 billion. And actually, I have to side a bit with the feds on this. Like, it seems to me that agreement was pretty specific from their point of view about what their expectation was for this money. And that's when they did announce their part of this sick benefit program. And so I don't really have a lot of time for provinces, whether you're John Horgan or Mr. Ford. It doesn't seem to matter to me that basically you've been either playing games with the money that you were handed by the feds and refusing to do this, or you're scared somehow of the business community coming after you when, by the way, they also are getting wage subsidies, which would assist them in doing this. So yeah, I think it's a bunch of political will problem, and it's have very tragic consequences, as we know.
I think one of the things that is missing in the whole pandemic is the old saying that good policy makes for good politics. I think that everyone has forgotten about that over the course of the last few months of this pandemic. Like, if you come up with a sound policy, then that is good politics when it comes to making it so that people are safe and the infection rates can go down.
Well, 100%. Like, why would you rather be the hero in this picture? I mean, one of the things that I also thought this week is, okay, say you're a provincial government that doesn't think the feds gave you enough money to do this properly, or not the way in which you think will help the most people. Do the part of it you can do, put some legislation, regulations together, and then you really do have the bully pulpit when it comes to talking to the federal government. Like, this makes no sense to me.
Agreed. Okay, on a brighter note, 1/3 of the Canadian population has received their first jab. 300,000 doses of Johnson & Johnson vaccine arrived this week. We've got a guest. And Johnson & Johnson is a one-jab vaccine, so that's 300,000 people. Pfizer's going to double its deliveries to 2 billion per week in May. So Theresa Tam said that restrictions could be lifted when 75% of the population have had their first jab and 20% have had both jabs. And projections done by Trevor Tome at the University of Alberta suggest that happy day will come on June 28th.
June 4th?
No, June 28th for both of them. June 4th for 75% with first jab.
He's the University of Calgary.
University of Calgary. So, could we be drinking in public parks by Canada Day?
I'd rather be on a patio or, in a backyard than in a park. I'm already drinking in parks right now. But as we are taping this right now, both Ontario and Quebec have just announced that as of May 17th, the Ontario population of people over 30 are now eligible to be vaccinated. So, That's a good thing. I think that we're moving things forward pretty quickly. And if you look at the number of just Pfizer coming in over the next little while, the provinces are going to have to really up their game to even be able to administer the number of shots that they're getting. If you look at Ontario, where I am right now, like the best day yet is 140,000. And, they're going to have to get that up to over 200,000 basically to keep up with what's going on. And that could very well make it so that those dates are sooner than later. And I think that's a good thing, and it's going to save summer for us.
Marcella, I mean, it does seem like, some of these curves have turned. I mean, it may not seem that way to people who are obviously, a lot of people in ICUs still, a lot of people still hooked up to ventilators. I mean, horrific numbers in Ontario. But there does seem to be some hope at the end of this now.
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty pumped reading that. I'm very bullish, by the way, that we'll probably beat that number, those targets, those dates. But, we still have significant problems. Look, there's a bunch of confrontation going on in Surrey yesterday, British Columbia, where people were lined up for hours and then found out that the vaccines weren't there, essentially had run out. We're seeing massive lineups in poor parts of Toronto too. So those things aren't good. But once the vaccine's in Canada, obviously, to your point, I do think the provinces will be able to ramp up quite significantly, and this will get a lot easier. The other thing I was excited about this week was the UK is working on a study that looks very promising to say that those of us that got the AstraZeneca will be not only safe, but maybe better protected if our second dose happens to be Pfizer. So hopefully that study turns out right, and then you and I will be vaccinated.
Probably just as well, because I don't see any AstraZeneca in the forecast. We don't know where we're getting our next batches from, unlike the Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson and Moderna. So anyway, well, let's end on that cheery note for once. And thank you both for coming out, and we'll see everyone again next week.
Cheers,
Thanks.
guys.
Bye.